The courtroom was filled with murmurs as Pam Bondi stepped through the heavy wooden doors, her presence commanding attention despite the tense atmosphere. Clutching her briefcase tightly, she walked with purpose, adjusting the lapel of her blazer as she moved towards the defendant's table. Judge Alan Prescott, known for his strict and uncompromising demeanor, was already seated, his cold eyes locked onto her. Pam barely acknowledged his gaze, focused instead on mentally preparing for what was supposed to be a straightforward business dispute. Just as she settled in her seat, Judge Prescott cleared his throat, his tone sharp and condescending. "Miss Bondi, I must remind you that religious symbols have no place in my courtroom," he declared, his voice echoing through the room. Pam looked up, momentarily caught off guard. She followed his gaze to her neck, where a simple gold cross rested just above her collarbone. A hush fell over the room as curiosity and tension swirled among the spectators. Pam straightened her posture, unfazed. "Your Honor," she replied calmly, "my cross is no different than a wedding ring or a family locket. It doesn't disrupt the proceedings." The judge's face tightened, clearly unimpressed. "Either remove it, or I will be forced to issue a fine for disregarding courtroom neutrality," he retorted. Pam hesitated for just a moment, then folded her hands over her briefcase, meeting his stare with unwavering determination. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she said firmly, "I intend to address this issue formally." The judge raised an eyebrow, almost amused. "Address it. This hearing is about a business dispute, not your personal grievances." Pam didn't flinch, her voice steady. "And I'm well aware that the First Amendment doesn't take a recess for personal opinions." A ripple of whispers swept through the room, but Judge Prescott remained stoic, clearly not expecting a challenge. Without waiting for his response, Pam reached into her briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Setting it on the table with deliberate precision, she looked back up, her expression resolute. "Before proceeding, I'd like to present a formal objection on record," she stated, making it clear she wasn't going to back down. Judge Prescott leaned back, his fingers tapping the armrest with controlled impatience. "You're an attorney, Miss Bondi, not a law professor," he sneered. Pam smiled faintly, her eyes unwavering. "Then let's discuss case law, shall we?" Pam picked up the paper, her voice unwavering as she began. "Tinker v. Des Moines, 1969, she stated firmly, her eyes locked onto the judge's. The Supreme Court ruled that individuals do not shed their constitutional rights when they enter a government institution, whether that's a school or a courtroom. A flicker of annoyance crossed Judge Prescott's face, but he didn't interrupt. The room fell completely silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Pam continued, her tone growing stronger. West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett, 1943. The court ruled that compelling individuals to remove or hide symbols of personal belief is a violation of their First Amendment rights. She set the paper down, folding her hands again as she stared directly at the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to know what legal precedent you're basing this fine on," she challenged. Judge Prescott hesitated, clearly unprepared for such a bold stance. He straightened his posture, his jaw clenching as he struggled to maintain his authority. "This courtroom operates under my authority, Miss Bondi," he replied sternly. "Courtroom neutrality must be preserved." Pam nodded slowly, refusing to break eye contact. "Your authority is not above the Constitution," she countered. The judge scoffed, leaning forward as if trying to intimidate her. "This is not a religious debate," he snapped. Pam raised an eyebrow, unbothered by his tone. "Then why did you make it one?" she shot back, her words slicing through the air. A few quiet gasps echoed through the audience, and even the court reporter seemed momentarily stunned. Judge Prescott's face darkened, his pride visibly bruised. "Courtroom rules exist for a reason," he asserted. Pam leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but cutting. "Rules that must be applied consistently," she argued. Or are you suggesting that wedding bands and lapel pins don't count as personal expression? The judge's fingers tightened around the armrest, and he shot a glare toward the murmuring spectators. He knew she had trapped him, and it was clear he didn't have a valid response. Pam pressed on, determined not to let him recover. And during Breast Cancer Awareness Month, you allowed an attorney to wear a pink ribbon in this very courtroom. Did that disrupt neutrality, Your Honor? Judge Prescott's face flushed, and his hands clenched into fists. The murmurs grew louder, and Pam remained steadfast, refusing to let him regain control of the narrative. Realizing the damage was done, the judge finally muttered through gritted teeth, "Mark the fine as pending review." Pam allowed herself a small, satisfied smile, but she knew this wasn't over. The real battle had just begun, and she wasn't going to let Prescott bury this incident under courtroom formality. As the tension in the courtroom began to dissipate, Pam gathered her papers calmly, aware that this small victory was just the beginning. She knew Prescott's pride had taken a hit, and a man like him wouldn't let it slide so easily. As she made her way out, she noticed a few spectators subtly nodding at her in quiet admiration. The air was still thick with disbelief at how the judge had been cornered. Outside the courthouse, Pam barely had time to catch her breath before her phone buzzed relentlessly. She glanced at the screen, calls, texts, and notifications pouring in from colleagues, journalists, and even former law school classmates. News of the courtroom clash was already spreading like wildfire, and she knew it wouldn't take long before it hit the media. Pam took a deep breath, bracing herself for what was to come. Just as she was about to respond to a message, her assistant Lauren rushed over, looking both exhilarated and anxious. "Pam, you need to see this," she said, holding up her tablet. On the screen was a headline already making waves. "Judge attempts to fine attorney for wearing a cross. Backfires spectacularly." Pam couldn't help but smirk. Of course, it wasn't just a legal issue anymore. It was a public spectacle. But her amusement was short-lived when Lauren scrolled down to a statement issued by the Florida Bar Association. While judges are entrusted to maintain decorum in the courtroom, it is vital that personal freedoms are respected. We trust our judicial system to handle such matters with fairness and integrity. Pam's smirk faded, realizing the deeper implication. "This is a warning," she muttered, her mind racing. Prescott wasn't going to take this lightly. He was already working behind the scenes to frame the narrative his way. Before she could digest it fully, Lauren hesitated. "There's more," she whispered, handing Pam another document. It was an official complaint, filed by Prescott himself, accusing her of disrupting courtroom proceedings and challenging judicial authority. Pam let out a dry, humorless laugh. "He's retaliating," she murmured. Lauren nodded, her expression tense. "He's trying to flip the story and make you look like the problem." Pam didn't seem fazed. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, already strategizing her next move. "If he thinks I'm going to let this slide, he's sorely mistaken," she declared, dialing a number on her phone. The call connected almost immediately. "Lisa, it's Pam," she said firmly. "I need you to break a story. A judge just filed a complaint against me for standing up to his unconstitutional fine. This is retaliation, plain and simple." There was a brief silence before the journalist on the other end replied, "You're saying a sitting judge is trying to punish you because you challenged his abuse of power?" Pam smiled faintly. "That's exactly what I'm saying, and I'm not backing down." Lisa's voice grew determined. "I'm on it. Let's make sure the world knows." Pam ended the call, already feeling the tide shifting. Prescott thought he could intimidate her into silence, but he had underestimated just how relentless she could be. The next morning, Pam sat at her desk with a steaming cup of coffee, her phone buzzing nonstop with notifications. Social media was on fire, hashtags trending about judicial overreach and constitutional rights. News outlets from every spectrum were running the story, dissecting every detail of the confrontation. Pam watched as legal analysts debated the fine's legality, some calling it a clear abuse of power, while others cautiously defended the judge's stance. Lauren entered the office, looking both thrilled and worried. "You've stirred up a storm," she said, placing a stack of printed articles on the desk. Pam glanced through them, noting how public sentiment was overwhelmingly on her side. One headline caught her attention. "Pam Bondi takes a stand for religious freedom. Judge Prescott under fire." Pam couldn't help but smile. Just then, Lauren's phone chimed, and she glanced at the screen with raised eyebrows. "You're going to want to see this," she said, turning the volume up as a news broadcast played. It was Judge Prescott, standing stiffly in front of a swarm of reporters, his expression controlled but visibly strained. "I have always upheld the integrity of this courtroom," he stated firmly. "My actions were solely to maintain neutrality, not to infringe upon personal freedoms. I welcome the judicial review process and will cooperate fully." Pam couldn't help but scoff. "He's trying to paint himself as the victim now," she muttered. Lauren nodded. "But the damage is done. Public opinion has already turned against him." Pam leaned back, knowing that Prescott's attempt to salvage his reputation wasn't going to be enough. Just as she was about to respond, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Lisa. "The Judicial Review Board just announced they're formally investigating Prescott's conduct. This is getting serious." Pam exhaled, feeling a surge of triumph. Prescott had thought he could quietly assert his authority and crush her resolve, but he had underestimated just how deeply this would resonate with people. She glanced back at Lauren, determination in her eyes. "He's not getting away with this. We're taking it all the way," she declared. Lauren smiled, relieved. "The public's behind you. No one's buying his neutrality excuse." Pam gave a slight nod, but she knew better than to let her guard down. Prescott wasn't one to back off easily. He would keep fighting to protect his image, and she had to be ready for whatever came next. Just as she was gathering her thoughts, Lauren's phone buzzed again. "Another update," she said, her voice cautious. "A statement from the Florida Judicial Review Board. They've decided to expedite the investigation, given the public interest and potential ethical violations." Pam couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. Prescott had wanted to put her in her place, but instead, his own career was now hanging in the balance. Pam took a slow sip of her coffee, letting the reality of the situation sink in. This wasn't just about defending her own rights anymore. It was about making sure that no one, no matter how powerful, could misuse their authority without being held accountable.